Hello, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report, the show that Warren Buffett doesn't want you to watch. You know, I got to ask rhetorically, and it'll be a theme, I think, for the next few minutes. America's got 20 or 30 million people unemployed now. The question is, why have they no savings? Why don't they have any savings? That's a very important question that we need to look into. Stacy.
Perhaps it's because of what Frederick Bastiat warned a couple hundred years ago. When plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in a society, over the course of time, they create for themselves a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it. Here we are, 49 years after going off the gold standard in 1971, which is a moral code and a legal system of its own. It imposes moral code upon the economic system in terms of honesty, in terms of distribution of wealth. But here we have a system that 49 years later has become rotten. The institutions have melted and disintegrated. And we have people like our own senator here in North Carolina, Senator Richard Burr, who was caught not only dumping a whole bunch of shares, $2 million worth after he got secret inside information about the coronavirus, but it turns out it's even worse. When Senator Richard Burr not only engaged in obvious insider trading on the coronavirus after receiving intelligence reports on the looming pandemic, but he also sold his townhouse to a pharma lobbyist above market price for a tidy profit. So here you have a guy who's supposed to be the legal system, the moral code of the nation in Congress, and he was actually had these pharma before him in terms of business, and he sold his house to one of these lobbyists.
There's two tracks here. There's two paths. There's two answers. One is looting. Right? So looting has become institutionalized, and congressmen and senators don't see any problem with looting. They trade on inside information. They glorify in it. They trade stock tips down there in Congress. That's the primary reason they get together in Congress, is to trade stock tips and trade on inside information, because they're kleptocrats and they're criminals and they should all be in jail and burnt and set on fire and get rid of them. The second reason would be that we live in a country that glorifies debt. That would be Keynesian economics. Keynesian economics hate savings. If you read Paul Krugman of the New York Times, he's constantly talking about the savings glut. He wants to burn savers. He hates savers because that's his job as an institutional policy puppet who wants to get everyone as indebted as possible, so that when they lose their job, they end up in shacks. They can't move. They're eating protein pills and they're treated like garbage, treated like mushrooms. Keep them in the dark and feed them beep. Right? That's Paul Krugman and the New York Times policy. That's Keynesianism. We hate savings. Austrian economics values savings, and it values individual sovereignty. And it's the proper way to run an economy. It's what Benjamin Franklin would have wanted had he been running the economy today. But all the founding fathers are dead. And instead we have posers, charlatans, crooks, and Paul Krugman.
When a multinational sets up one of these factories in Mexico, what they look for is single mothers who are desperate. They look for people in debt who are desperate, who aren't going to give them trouble, who don't go on to a protest line, that they're shut up and they're quiet. Right now, so many Americans, as we know, the Fed even told us a few months ago that more than half of Americans have no money at all in their savings account. In fact, they have debt. So they know for a fact that you're desperate right now and that you'll accept whatever's happening with the Fed.
That's Keynesianism.
And these so-called stimulus.
That's right.
And I want to look at this, inequality and anti-capitalism, one chart. The Fed for the last 25 years have used their tools and money to preserve equity and credit prices at all costs. As a result, when economies contract, average people get hurt. Capitalists and progressives should both puke this chart up. This is U.S. financial assets now 5.8 times GDP. So this is the financialization of the economy that started in 1995, when the divine right of kings, the divine right of these the oligarchs at the top, the elite, the Wall Street, the politically connected. This is the moral code. This is the legal system. This is the monetary system.
And I said recently about the so-called progressives like Jimmy Dore or Cenk Juncker. They talk about the idea that we should somehow teach the leaders to be more moral, and then we should ask them to be better people. But they never actually talk about that that's impossible in a system that glorifies debt and has no basis for savings to establish the economy with real money, either gold or Bitcoin. That's never come out of those Jimmy Dore's mouth. He's never advocated for gold, not one time. And that's a huge mistake. There's no such thing as a progressive if your only idea is to try to morally assuage corrupt, institutional, prison-worthy bad guys to act better, right? That's not progressiveness. That's idiocy.
That chart is from 1995, soaring up the financialization when basically the elite, the plunderers at the top, ran away with it all.
So to get back to your Bastiat point, active during the divine right of kings. And who gave the kings this divine right? Religion. And then the transition to the fiat world or era was straddled by the Bank of England to try to preserve the wealth of the monarchy of Europe through a central bank. And then they started the fiat era. And then we have Keynesian economics, which is the religion of the fiat era, to give the apostles, like Nobel Prize winning economists, the idea that they are divinely endowed with the smarts and intelligence to centralize our economy and award papal indulgences to those who they think are worthy of going into fiat heaven. And Austrian economics says, no, you have to have savings. You have to have actual individual sovereignty, which is also the basis for the Declaration of Independence for America, the United States. And for those who are still espousing the dirty policies of Keynesianism, they have to deal with this with their own conscience.
Going back to the divine right of a class of people, when we had that back in the age of empires and kingdoms, that of course kept the starving masses, the peasants in line because they don't want to mess with God, right? God had given these people the divine right. The same thing here is in this structure of kleptocracy, the financialization. It started in 1971, where we went off the gold standard and the individual themselves could not measure their own worth. Just like back in the divine rights of kings, the individual was not able to measure their chance of getting into heaven unless the kings, the priests and stuff he controlled would tell them whether or not they had paid enough indulgences. The same sort of system we have here, where you're not going to get up you're not going to be allowed, the toll bridge is not going to be lifted for you if you aren't participating and playing the game. If we regard gold as the continuing true measure of monetary stability, it suggests that stock markets gains in the almost 50 years since are almost entirely due to money illusion, or the erosion of the dollar's buying power. So the red line is the S&P 500 in dollar terms, and the black line is in gold terms. That money illusion is the same thing as prior to John Locke and Bastiat and these sort of people. There was an illusion that the king was somehow superior and closer to God than you, the individual. Only he could give you any rights, that you had no endowed rights at birth. Here is the same thing, is that it's a money illusion, the illusion that this divine right of the markets to always go up is somehow ordained by their closeness to the Fed.
And is there anything more troubling for those who would be against the monarchy in power than when we heard that these relief checks being sent out by the government were all going to be signed by Donald Trump, right? That's an extraordinary act of hubris that nothing I've seen or read or heard Donald Trump say during his entire presidency really worried me until that. And then I realized, you know what? America has slipped back down into pure monarchy. And it's the Fed and Trump. He was also raised in Keynesian economics. He also doesn't really, can't blame him. He doesn't understand money. He just understands debt. He's the king of debt, as he himself says. He calls himself the king of debt. Every US dollar should say, have Trump's picture, his signature, with the phrase, the king of debt. And we reject monarchy if we are Americans. If we're not rejecting monarchy, then we have to ask yourself, how American do you think you really are?
He's always, from day one, been pressing Jerome Powell to cut interest rates, to issue more debt. From day one. I think he announced that in his inaugural address to the nation. It's like, cut rates. So this is something he's been interested in. However, those people, the divine class, they only operate for themselves. They do not care about you. They will snatch your so-called stimulus check out of your bank account. They themselves will be granted money from you, the taxpayer, to make up for all of their mistakes. But look at you, the individual, how much they've taken from you.
This is what I object when I hear progressives, because their whole agenda is to get the people acting poorly in government to act better. They're never going to act better for exactly the reason you just stated. They are born to act poorly and not in the interest of the collective or the masses or the people or the common good. Their only way to fight these people is to come up with a competing form of money that destroys fiat. And we only know that one exists, and that's, of course, Bitcoin.
Bitcoin and gold. Gold would have told you this entire time that these people are not divine. Jamie Dimon is not divine. Lloyd Blankfein said he was doing God's work. He is not divine. Those people are not billionaires because they are divine and somehow better than you. You have been subsidizing it. You have been subsidizing it. People who pay the taxes, who work in this economy, who are the essential workers, have been paying it. And I'll show you in these two charts here. Here is the total household net worth of the United States measured in ounces of gold rather than dollars over the past 50 years. And as you can see, it went down from when we went off the gold standard in 1971. And then it went up a bit during the dot-com era that did expand some of the wealth to ordinary people who were holding shares in their Schwab account and their various other online accounts. And now it's just sunk. But in dollar terms, this is the same chart. They give you the illusion, the one that is working harder and harder to stay in the same place. They give you the illusion that you're actually getting wealthier, and this is all good for you.
Right. Well, Zimbabwe's stock market was skyrocketing while the people were literally digging in the dirt for flecks of gold so that they could eat. So, that's the difference between gold and the illusion of price manipulation that comes with fiat money and the papacy of the Federal Reserve Bank. It's supposed to be separation of church and state. When you treat the Fed like the Vatican, you've got a freaking problem, America. Hey, we're going to take a break. When we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Now, time to turn to Will Reeves of the Fold app. Will Reeves, welcome to Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max. Great to be here.
All righty, tell us about the Fold app.
It's pretty simple. We are giving Bitcoin to as many people in the least amount of time as possible. We give free Bitcoin for shopping at retailers like Amazon, Uber, Starbucks, and we've recently teamed up with Visa to launch a Bitcoin rewards card that will give everyone the opportunity to stack sats and earn the world's scarcest money.
So this is really exciting. I saw you tweet about it and immediately wanted to get you on. So you've got this deal with Visa. You can use my Visa card and spend my fiat, or get rid of my fiat money, and I get Bitcoin cash back rewards. And so it's got to be the most painless way to stack sats or accumulate Bitcoin ever. And what's been the response so far?
It's been an incredible response. I think this product has been a lot of people have been waiting for it. And so we got a great response from the community. In the first 48 hours, we had over 15,000 people sign up for the card. And that number keeps growing. And we also got great coverage from mainstream media. And it's always great to see a Bitcoin company able to break through the echo chamber.
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin, as you point out, it's the hardest money ever created. What's so important about hard money, somebody might ask? And I'm reading the headlines, and there's 22 million people now unemployed in America. That's projected to get to 30 million. In America, savings are really considered evil, and Keynesian economics is the way the economy should run. And Nobel-winning economists like Krugman referred to a savings glut. He tries to vilify savings. But if those 22 million people had been saving Bitcoin, even 100 Satoshis for a penny, even a little bit, every time you go out and buy a pack of cigarettes or a Coca-Cola or a Happy Meal, you bought some Satoshis instead, they'd be sitting on $500,000 or $1 million and be able maybe to ride out this unemployment storm. How did America become a place where savings are vilified? Well,
I don't think there's a better time to launch a card like this. While the Federal Reserve is making our money seem like an infinite supply, we have been working with Visa to help them understand the value proposition of scarce, sound money. And in this time, there's never been a better foil for Bitcoin than the Federal Reserve's infinite QE. And at a time of record unemployment, as stocks are going up and unemployment is going up, Fold is here to make it the easiest way for the everyman to get a hold of those sats that can make a big difference in their life in the future.
It's an asymmetric warfare going on. The average person in America has no savings, or maybe they have $200 or $300 in the bank. And when the Ponzi scheme collapses again, as it does every 10 or 11 years, the folks who build the Ponzi scheme on Wall Street get an immediate bailout, no questions asked. Steve Mnuchin wires them $1 trillion, $5 trillion, $6 trillion, whatever's needed. It's just instantaneous. And then the poor suckers who are living as wage slaves, they might get some money, or it's sent to the wrong address, or it's a check that they can't cash anywhere, or it's got to have Donald Trump's, signature. And they really treat the population with contempt in America now, sadly. And the only way out is individual sovereignty, and the easiest way to do that is with Bitcoin. So how's the market, do you think, for this going forward for the Fold app? We have a lot of startups on the show. How big is the company now? And where are you on that cycle? Is it really, how long you've been around? And what do you think is going to be your prognosis in the next 2 or 3 years, Steve?
Yeah, Fold has been around for a while. We've seen different cycles through two halvings with Bitcoin, and we've been able to see the growth and really be able to fine tune what the real value proposition of Bitcoin is for everyday people. And we launched our mobile app back in October to give you cash back at retailers, and now have launched this Visa card. And so, 93% of all of Fold users said they would switch to a card that gives them Bitcoin back instead of cash back or airline miles if it was available. And with Fold, you're talking tens of thousands of users, but we also know that we are just starting a trend, and we will see many others come. And that's only going to increase buy pressure and increase accessibility to this wonderful asset we call Bitcoin.
Right. Well, I guess the model seems like it scales pretty well. I know of one other company that has Bitcoin cash back rewards. I think the model is they contact various retailers, they get them to sign up for the program, and they get some rewards back in the form of Bitcoin. But the Fold model seems like it scales better. You just use that Visa card and you get the Bitcoin cash back. And let me ask you this. So, as far as Bitcoin goes, the halving is coming shortly in the month of May. This happens every 4 years. The mining reward is cut in half. The stock to flow model improves. It's being greeted with a huge anticipation and excitement in the Bitcoin community. Where do you fall on this? Big news or just another day in the life of Bitcoin? Well,
it depends on how long you've been in this world. And I would say for us, it's just another day. But I think it's really important for the adoption cycle of Bitcoin. This halving has historically brought in many new entrants into the space, generated interest beyond the Bitcoin community into the wider world, and continues to introduce Bitcoin to more and more people. So I think it is a historic moment. And when you're talking about Bitcoin rewards, if if all of the rewards paid out in cashback rewards last year in the United States went to Bitcoin instead of airline miles, 16 million Bitcoin would have been distributed to everyday people in a very distributed fashion. And so I think when you mix the halving plus products like the one that we are introducing, you get really incredible effects. Number one, getting more people to participate, but also more buy pressure, which even makes that halving even more scarce.
Let me ask you about the Lightning Network, because this is another hot topic in the Bitcoin world. How has Lightning worked out so far in terms of scaling issues? Has it helped, or does it still have further to go? What are the limitations? What tell us more? Give us the update on Lightning.
So, to be perfectly honest, Lightning has done wonders for our users in terms of using Bitcoin in their everyday, but also being a tool for people who may not be familiar with Bitcoin to have an experience with it, and it feels just like their credit card. It's instant, it's fast, and with Fold, it's accepted at a ton of retailers. And so it's really brought the medium of exchange use case of Bitcoin to a kind of a next level. And what we see here at Fold is about 15% of users that come in spending on a credit card switch to using Lightning because they can earn more cash back on Fold. And so we know that it can provide an experience that matches incumbent payment methods, and it gives users more cash back savings. And so we really feel that we have got the infrastructure, the UX, and the incentives to a point where Lightning can continue to grow. And now it is certainly not without its issues that we're actively working on. Scaling is certainly an issue. If we suddenly transferred all of the transfers going through Fold on credit cards over to Lightning, we might have some issues. So we still have some work to do on the network itself. But the good thing is, if we continue the pace of innovation and the pace of scaling, we're going to be in a great place in a year from now.
The fiat world around the world is crumbling. People are looking for alternatives. Gold market and gold and currencies all over the world is hitting new all-time highs. It's set to make a new all-time high against the US dollar. People now see when Steve Mnuchin and Neil Kashkari go on television and say, we've got infinite quantitative easing, money, printer go brrr, where there's no end in sight. We're going to keep printing money until we fill the entire 7 seas with fiat garbage. And they see the raining of paper money in Venezuela cluttering the streets. This is Bitcoin's year.
Max, I'll tell you, I've been working in the space for a little bit. I've never been more bullish than I am now. I think the circumstances that we see around the world are the perfect conditions to make Bitcoin's core value proposition shine. And the infrastructure and ecosystem of wonderful applications that are going to be introducing Bitcoin to a whole new swath of people. It's all coming together. It's going to be a wonderful year, and I'm nervous but very excited for what's ahead.
When I look at the local Bitcoins charts of where Bitcoin is being adopted, I see countries like Argentina where adoption is skyrocketing, all over South America, Brazil, Colombia. I see in Egypt, Bitcoin adoption is now skyrocketing. So countries that are really at the end of their rope in terms of their tolerance for the central bank skullduggery and it's criminal activity actually. They are now jumping into Bitcoin in a big way. Some countries like Australia, they've taken their time in adopting into Bitcoin because they've had it easy. They've been able to print their own money. The Australian government has inflated that housing bubble 3 or 4 times over the past 15 years. They haven't had to work really for a living. They just had to ride on the expansion of their expanding property bubble. Same thing in the UK. No one's worked in the UK for 20 years. They just borrow against their home. It's been a bubble. And now suddenly they wait a minute, I've got to work for a living? So they're looking for hard money for the first time in decades. Do you think countries like America and the United Kingdom are going to finally wake up to Bitcoin? And I would include in that people like Mark Cuban and Peter Schiff, who seem to be really tone deaf when it comes to understanding this technology. Will?
First time I heard about Bitcoin was actually down in Argentina during one of their many defaults. And when you looked around, even the case being made at that time, the value proposition of Bitcoin was clear: hard money in a climate of easy, infinitely printable money that's worthless. And the value propositions shine through. And we're going to see, as you mentioned, that happening across many countries that are experiencing similar things. And as we see the adoption there, we are also going to see the people in the United States, the Mark Cubans, the Peter Schiffs, see that number go up and FOMO into it. And it's going to be a worldwide movement to get us there. And I think both regions play important roles in the adoption of Bitcoin. But I truly believe that you are right, that the core and good adoption that we're going to see is going to be primarily in those countries you mentioned, and the U.S. is hopefully going to be following not too far behind that.
Will Reeves, thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Great to be here, Max. Thank you.
And that is going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Will Reeves of Fold. If you want to catch us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.